But she's just had this incredible career. She's done so many different things. And Noor, I would love to invite you on stage to come talk to us about some of the work that you've been doing. Do you need this? Thank you so much.
Beloved. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Wow. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Ioana. Thank you, Nick, for really teeing up the conversation. We're not really going to be talking about AI, but because of AI's role in the ecosystem of journalism today, it's never been more important to truly recognize the human voices behind some of the most important stories of our time. So trust is not disappearing from media, it is relocating from institutions to individuals. Now, before I begin sharing a little bit about my story, I just want to get a raise of hands. How many people in this room have at least one or two media organizations that they 100% fully trust in their reporting? Raise the hands. Fully trust. Cool. Another raise of hands. How many of you have an independent journalist or certain storytellers that you follow because they have built trust with you as a reader, a viewer, a listener? I'd like to say there's more hands for that. Amazing. We are not just witnessing a crisis of business models in journalism, but a fundamental shift in where trust resides. I am also a journalism professor at SUNY New Paltz, and when I talk to my students about what news organizations or where they get their information from, 10 out of 10, it is always from an individual storyteller, an individual journalist. And so I think the trend is that younger generations really require more trust being built with them. And that's the essence of what we're going to be talking about today. So my career trajectory was made possible because of social media. I like to think that I came up in like the height, the best era of social media, where the things that went viral were like the ice bucket challenge or Chris Brown's Forever being like the wedding entrance. Does anybody remember that video of like everybody dancing in the wedding entrance? Yes, yes, maybe you guys are a little older than me. And somehow, one of the things that went viral was this photo right here, 2012. So 13 years ago, I was shadowing a journalist. I sat at the anchor desk, and I posted this as my Facebook profile photo, and I said, this is what my dream looks like, and I'm going to make it happen. And my dream was to be the first Muslim woman in a hijab as an anchor on a mainstream American network. Being a part of a mainstream network was literally my dream. At the time, this photo started going viral, and my sister came up with a brilliant hashtag, because every viral moment needs a hashtag. And the hashtag was Let Noor Shine. My name Noor means light, and this essence of this hashtag really became my beat. My stories, the stories that I would pursue, the stories that I would investigate, were stories to shine light on the most misrepresented and misunderstood communities. So I eventually, started reporting for print, newspaper, radio, and then finally achieved my dream of reporting for a local television. Long live local. I'm a big fan of local news. While I was at the local TV station, I had a great news director who really believed in me, but wasn't really open to taking as many risks as I would have liked. And so there was this one story that really changed everything for me. And the story is that 10 years ago, in April 2015, a man named Freddie Gray was murdered by police in Baltimore, Maryland. And I don't know if any of you actually remember the news coverage around this specific police brutality incident, but the terms rioting and looting were really highlighted. And there was a lot of this fear-mongering and misrepresentation of what was actually happening in communities. And I was assigned to go cover a press conference where Al Sharpton was going to be speaking, and there was a lot of protesters outside of that because they were like, why is this guy speaking for us? And I also had some concerns about why was I being assigned a press conference, per usual, because this kind of created this problem of these pre-written scripts, go to the story, grab a couple of sound bites and come back. So my videographer and I, her name was Erica, she was a young black woman in dreads. We would call ourselves the best worst team because we were always seen with suspicion. We were walking back to our car after we were done reporting the story, and this like really eager young man approached us because we had our equipment, and he said, "Walk down a couple of blocks and you will see the most beautiful thing you've ever seen." And so we walked down a couple of blocks, and we saw one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. And it was an entire block party with a Michael Jackson impersonator dancing on tops of cars, people wearing I Bleed Baltimore shirts. The locals were coming up to us saying we would love to share our story, we would love to share our truths. It was the first time they had left their homes in days, and not a single camera was there, except for ours. And this is important to note because there was an entire camp of networks broadcasting just a few blocks away who were completely missing this story. I remember at the end, like my videographer and I, we like hugged and cried because we were like, this is why we are in this field. So we go back to our station, and my news director doesn't air the story. But instead, I aired it. I posted it on YouTube, where it garnered more views than the actual broadcast itself. And that was my first lesson in independent distribution. This frustration, this nagging voice kept hitting my head, and it was just not understanding this notion of pre-written scripts and unrealistic deadlines and just the fear of actually taking risks. And the thing that changed everything for me was shortly after this Baltimore story, where I pitched a story to my news director about an abandoned insane asylum just a few blocks away from us that was one of the worst cases of medical abuse in the US's history. And the case that shut it down was still open 40 years later. Because I would have to trespass in order to tell this story, because my actual younger siblings and cousins told me that all the medical records were, thousands of medical records were still lying on the floor in the institution. They had never been cleaned up. But because I would have to trespass, my news director said no, and so I did what any good journalist would do, and I quit my job. I did, yeah, we can clap for that, it's fine. I quit my job. Thanks, I just needed that little boost. So I took my dad's old broken camera, and I taught my cousin how to film, and I went to Forest Haven. I collected all of these documents that literally had people's names and their toilet habits and their behavior habits, and it just seemed really crazy that they were all out. In 3 months, we ended up following some of the stories from the medical documents where we found people who had been institutionalized for decades. This man, Brian Slaughter, had lived in Forest Haven for 30 years. His mother, who you see up there, was forced to give him up because of his disabilities. And instead of just telling this story of this haunting, what I found was that Brian was actually a part of this incredible choir group that was Grammy nominated, that was part of this Art and Drama Therapy Institute, and there was this sense of opportunity to tell this story as a form of justice, as a form of healing for this family. And it was, because it was the first time that his mother ever got to really talk about her pain of being forced to give him up. And we were able to see them reconnect in a way that reminded me truly why we tell these stories. So there's a few reasons why this story worked. There were very low technical barriers. I used an old camera that was just thrown around my house. YouTube was a free platform. I was able to put it up online. Luckily, I had already started building my social media following, so I knew exactly who my audience was. And when this documentary came out, a few great things happened. I remember the night before publishing, I said to myself, I have no idea what's going to happen. Maybe I made a huge mistake because I left the one TV network that was going to hire me. But I just know that doing this type of work is the only thing that makes sense to me. And so then, literally the day after, my now partner in everything, Adam, reached out to collaborate on a streetwear collection for a social cause of my choice, where I learned that fashion was also a storytelling medium. It was the first time I really thought about the extensiveness of the storytelling mediums that exist. Shaquille O'Neal, yes, that Shaq. came across the film. I told him that I had recorded it on a broken camera, and he bought me $10,000 worth of new camera equipment. Swear to God, he's super cool. Scripps Media had a digital news startup called Newsy. They reached out to me to help them start their documentary team. This is all literally within like 2 weeks. And finally, the most important thing is that 6 months later, the Forest Haven case, after 40 years, had closed. Now, I got to Newsy. I was able to start telling the stories that I really wanted to tell. Stories about food and immigration, the misconceptions of witches in Salem, this tattoo artist who was covering up racist and gang-related tattoos as giving people a second chance. This beat really continued of shining light on the most misrepresented and misunderstood people. And as I was doing this reporting, community became a direct part, a direct tool to my storytelling approach. So my stories would consistently receive millions of views. They would start a lot of conversations. But when I would do a series like A Woman's Job, this entire season was curated by me just posting on Instagram saying, hey, does anybody have favorite women who work in male-dominated fields? We would love to tell their stories. When I spent 4 years investigating the sex trade in the United States for a documentary and podcast called Sold in America, because it took me several years, I started documenting the behind the scenes of my reporting, vlogging, having open conversations with my audience about my process so that they felt like they were a part of it, so that we could build hype around the series, which also received tens of millions of views and awards. This idea of people trusting people, not institutions, reminds us that the relationship between the storyteller and the community is the new foundation of journalism. And this experience of collaborating with a news organization was really, really incredible for me. It was incredibly challenging because the work that we did was very, very challenging. And I feel like we don't talk enough about the secondhand trauma that comes with reporting certain stories. But the thing that really, really shifted everything for me, and I've never shared this on stage before, and I really hesitated to share it now because I wanted to make sure it was with very, very clear intention. And my intention for sharing this is that I know that this is an issue that many of you have probably faced as well. But in the height of working on Sold, all of the extracurricular activities around me, hosting conversations or hosting events for the stories or building around the story on social media, that was obviously all self-funded, and I put my own time into that. And so when everybody in the newsroom was asking for a raise, I asked for a raise as well. We all deserved it. We worked so hard. And the company was growing because of the stories that we were telling. And I will never forget, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, I will never forget what was said. I remember I asked, and the response, very earnest, very sincere, was, but Noor, you're the face of this company. I thought that would be enough for you. Ew. And I literally am shaking sharing this because I don't have any ill feelings towards this, but I remember feeling this pit in my stomach. It was well, you wear hijab and nobody would have hired you. I thought that would be enough for you. Or well, we've, let you tell whatever stories that you want. I thought that would be enough for you. And this idea of enough for you is rooted in scarcity, not collaboration. And it took me a really long time to realize the extent of that. It wasn't until after I left the company that I learned about the value of name, brand, and likeness. I didn't even know about the value that came with, what I was doing at the time. I was so young. I literally investigated the sex trade when I was 21. And so, anyway, obviously, I left. I really recalibrated my relationship with collaboration versus control. And I think that a lot of times with media networks and institutions, there's this idea to hold on to our talent, to try to control who they talk to, who they partner with, what they do. I know this because a lot of my peers experience this. But I really believe in the expansiveness of collaboration. And so my partner Adam and I, we started a company called At Your Service. It's a storytelling company for healing, service, and justice. We needed space to activate around our stories outside of the traditional journalism rules. It's interesting that yesterday, when Bob Woodward was speaking, he talked about how important it is to take our time in reporting, to get more sources, to talk more, to really like let the story reveal itself. This is something that I talk to my students about a lot. You have an intention, you have a thesis of what the story is going to be, but the story knows what it wants to be because the story is alive. You have to let the story reveal itself to you. And I needed a space to really like prioritize this community-first approach. We wanted to explore and expand complex stories. I wanted to take my time, but know that there were other avenues of storytelling that I could, and mediums that I could engage with. And I want to specifically speak to something that maybe some of you also wonder about, but I also had to do this work for myself, which is speaking to the difference between storyteller and journalism. So I use them interchangeably just because of how I've engaged with these terms myself. But journalism, as Adam shares with me, is like a specific methodology and tradition. We have like a very specific, like we all know the basic tenets of journalism that we learned, many of us in journalism school. But storytellers have a broader canvas and a more direct relationship with the community and the audience. I've embraced being both. I use journalistic rigor and integrity and the approach to fact-checking and ethics while also maintaining connection, vulnerability, and transparency with the audience in a way that sees those things as strengths and not compromises. And we have to stop like kind of fooling ourselves and thinking that this hard structure to objectivity and neutrality that we hold on to so tight isn't a real thing. It's a clear thing that should be held lightly. Because the reality is, for many of us who come from marginalized communities, this idea of objectivity and neutrality has never been an actual true thing. And that there are people who prioritize certain stories over others because they're not a part of those communities' experiences. And what being a storyteller allows me to do is to listen to the stories and of the communities who are like, hey, this is the thing that you're getting wrong about us. And that takes accountability. That takes asking ourselves, what is the role that I'm playing in this story? What responsibility do I have to the people of the story that we are talking about? Most importantly, I've learned that audiences engage with the identity of journalist and storyteller differently. They expect institutions to be neutral reporters, but they connect with individuals as trusted guides through complex realities. This is why independent voices have been able to build deeper trust, especially with young people who, could really work on their media literacy, but are really engaged with the internet and with how social media works, and they're able to see through inauthenticity. Within AYS, I think like the thing that I realized was the key strategy. It was kind of like a line that kept repeating in my head was story first, medium second. I loved working in print, I loved working in radio, I loved working in local TV, I loved working in digital, I loved working in documentary, and I didn't want to limit myself to one medium. I found that, dinner parties were a medium, retreats were a medium, virtual clubs were a medium. The mediums of storytelling are incredibly expansive, and this idea of being an independent journalist or an independent storyteller protects our freedom to tell stories how the story wants to be told. I literally, when I set an intention for a story that I'm going to report on, I ask the story, how do you want to be expressed? I think the other thing that I really want to make sure I clarify is the difference between freelancer and independent storyteller. A freelancer pitches stories to outlets, and the outlets purchase those stories that represent the network. An independent storyteller recognizes that they themselves are a network, and that when you are working with an outlet, it is for collaboration, not commission. This requires a completely different approach to partnership, to compensation, to credit. And I think about this in abundance, by the way. It's not like I want to just take from them and extract from them because I'm afraid that they're going to extract from me. A really great example of how we were able to do this was with my last investigation, which is called Rep, a story about the stories we tell. We collaborated with iHeartMedia, where they supported us with funding, with a team, and I was able to investigate a question that was very dear to me, that forced me to really take accountability and responsibility, which is that how has the way that Muslims and Arabs have been represented in American media, or rather misrepresented in American media, shaped American culture and society as a whole? This was the first time that I really was like, whoa, collaboration in this way creates abundance for the institution, the network, and also the independent storyteller. Because across the board, I think one of the things that if you talk to an independent journalist or a storyteller, that they'll tell you is that we prioritize freedom over everything. Freedom of speech, freedom of press over everything. Freedom to tell the truth out loud, to ask the hard questions out loud. I was just at Good Night, Good Luck on Broadway. I was watching the show, and George Clooney, who plays Edward R. Murrow, he opens the entire show with talking about media in the main is being used to delude, divide, and insulate people. And I remember laughing to myself and being like, oh wait, has anything changed? It looks a little bit different, but the feelings are still the same. Journalists are still fighting to tell the truth. And I think in this position of really remembering that stories are a form of service, that independence gives you freedom to match form to function, rather than fitting every story into the same format, allows you to be nimble, allows you to be expansive, allows you to iterate and then iterate again. Like when COVID hit, Rep originally was supposed to be a documentary series. We had an amazing production partner that we had in line, and then of course we couldn't film it. And so I was like, wait a minute, if we tell this as audio, we're going to be able to go deeper. I'm a big fan of theater of the mind, so it was very cinematically scored. And we were able to create visuals in a way that people were able to close their eyes and lay on the grass and be teleported to where the story wanted to take them. I really do believe that the next era of journalism is being your own network. These are some of the people from around the world who tune into, we host different virtual clubs, to literally expand our stories. So Rep was produced 2 years ago. Oh my gosh, almost 3 years ago. It literally feels like yesterday because we are still, I'm teaching this story in classes. We host virtual clubs where people from around the world tune in to go on what I call their Rep journeys. So we're leaving room for people to continue the stories themselves. And a great way that we've done this is through, maybe I shouldn't, sorry. A great way we have done this is through brand partnerships, is through the ability to, streamline the stories that we wanted to tell. And when I think about why I wanted to become my own media network, I think about wanting to have a place to tell radical story ideas, stories that, really wake us up and wake our, thank you to Nick for bringing up consciousness, because that's kind of my favorite topic right now. It's really thinking about, why are we here? What are we doing, guys? I ask this all the time. What are we doing? We are in the field of telling the truth, of being radical, of being loud, of being disruptive, and I feel so bored by how I'm seeing things, mostly from mainstream networks and from my friends who still work within traditional news. I know that so much of their time is being taken up by the tension between not being able to tell the stories that they know need to be told and being attached to this form of stability, whatever that actually, looks like. I want to talk about brand partnerships because I think that it's often been, quite controversial for people to see independent journalists or journalists in general partner with brands. The way that we think about it is that brands are intentional ad breaks. So I get to be more transparent about when I work with my commercial break. I get to build better partnerships, and oftentimes it's around storytelling. So for example, we partnered with On Running, who was a big fan of Rep, We told the story of 3 Afghan women who had fled, evacuated after the Taliban took over in Kabul, who reunited to run the New York City Marathon together. And we got to tell that story through a video, through a guided podcast run, through a live event with a panel and an audience. And we got to like just keep the stories going alive. So that's like the best case scenarios, when a brand is like, here is a bunch of money. We just like, if you're gonna tell a story, tell it around. We'll give you some like ideas and options, but you have full creative freedom. And then there's just like a traditional ad break. We work a lot with if anybody knows the brand Prada, we work a lot with them, and they're able to like, you know, I'll do like a brand partnership, like a traditional, easy brand partnership, and then we put the money back into our business to tell the stories that we want to tell, because oftentimes we are paying for them ourselves, which is not the most sustainable model, but I'll get to the whole like, what do we do together kind of vibe. Okay, this is really where news networks and independent journalists can collaborate, but before I get to that, one of the things that really comes with being an independent journalist is this thing called activism. I grew up learning that activism was probably like the absolute worst thing that you could do as a journalist. But because I wore a hijab, I was often called an activist. It was only recently that a friend of mine literally called me out on that, and she was like, but you always have been an activist because you've always wanted your stories to create change. That's true. And I think now a lot of independent storytellers tout the title activist. I still can't bring myself to do it, but that's my own programming. Also, I just don't like titles in general, so there's that. This headline up here, Blurred Lines, Journalism or Activism, that's from an article that I wrote 11 years ago. The reason I wrote that article was because I had been reporting very objectively, transparently about the deaths that were happening in Gaza 11 years ago. And somebody in the newsroom called me out for being an activist. And I said, how am I being an activist? I'm literally reporting on a death toll. And then I realized, oh my gosh, when you tell empathetic stories around Arabs and Muslims in the US, it's often lumped into activism. But I like to take the Christiane Amanpour approach. When Christiane Amanpour was reporting in Bosnia on the Bosnian genocide, which by the way, wasn't called a genocide until 12 years later, she was accused of being pro-Muslim. And her response was, as journalists, we must remain truthful, never neutral, and that we must never draw a false moral equivalence. The first time I read that, I was in journalism school, and that was honestly the best piece of advice that has stayed with me until today. Many independent journalists are forced onto this path because the institutions that we work with or work for do not really give us the space to fully bring our humanity to our work. This doesn't mean I'm saying that when you tell a story, you have to insert yourself into the story. Sometimes you can be very transparent about like, hey, this is why I'm telling the story, which is what my audience and community loves when I do. But we have to recognize that service journalism and advocacy reporting are not the corruption of the craft, but they are vital expressions of it. It's already happening. The stories that people connect with the most are ones that see humans as humans. And we're really struggling with that, and I do not understand why. Maybe it's because I'm in my independent journalist bubble, but it is a problem. The myth of this perfect objectivity has really harmed our space. So, of course, it is impossible to talk about independent journalists without talking about the journalists in Gaza. 100% impossible. The Committee to Protect Journalists say that this is the deadliest period for journalists in all of time, and all the time that they've reported. And I have up here the names of 174 journalists who were killed by Israel in Gaza, but it's reported that it's more than 200. And I wanted to speak directly to at least one of the journalists. And the reason for this is because we have to remember our humanity. And if you have an issue with remembering your humanity, then I really, really hope that you have the capacity to take a good look in the mirror. Mu'tasim Murtaja, he is a friend of mine who I've been staying in touch with. His family was killed. He's raising his brother's kids. He had a media company called Record Media. It was his dream. It was bombed 3 times. And the thing that really forced me to include his story in particular was that just last week, he took the final remains of his documents from his media company and he burned them to stay warm. Can anybody in this room imagine being in that position? Not just that, can anybody in this room imagine having to still pick up a camera? Do we have it in us? And this is how I know that journalism is the best field in the world. Because the greatest of us, the greatest storytellers, still pick up a camera. Still pick up a camera when death is around the corner, because there's nothing more important than telling our stories out loud, by telling our truths out loud. So I wanted to have someone's voice play up here on stage. My friend Afif, who is also an independent journalist, he's on rotation right now, volunteering with a medical organization. And I wanted to make sure that we had somebody from there speak to us.
Hey Noor, it's Afif from Gaza. Hopefully my voice is coming in clear. It's pretty noisy here with sort of drones and everything. I'd say that the necessity of independent journalism is that we're not compromised. We're not compromised by profit or by what our bosses want or what editors think will sell. We do journalism purely and for the cause of humanity, really. Like, we're just sort of serving the interests of a free press rather than, you know, consumerism. And I think that that's what's led me to Gaza, to document what's going on here, despite what it could do to my career or my prospects in the future, because I'm compelled to tell the truth and to be a part of history and document it in a time when there's very little coverage from outside journalists, and the coverage from the amazing Palestinian journalists is probably very burdensome, given that their lives are under extreme strain, if not, you know, their lives are actually just being taken from them. I hope that that answers your question, and I really appreciate you.
What's happening in Gaza, what's happening in the Congo, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in Venezuela is not new. But it is the independent journalists who are documenting their truths, who are keeping stories alive that otherwise would be lost. I call this this moment, this global realignment of where storytelling is really going, where trust is really going, the great recalibration. Those of us who have the privilege, who have access to reporting, relative safety, the privilege to say what we mean and mean what we say. We have a responsibility to those who are in imminent danger. And this isn't just people who are on the ground in Gaza, obviously. This is our hearts and our souls. And I really believe that independent journalists have the opportunity to bring back soul and heart to media institutions and media companies. Because this is when collaboration is actually very vital. Independent journalists need amplification, resources, and protection from established media. And networks need their on-the-ground truth. That is, if they still prioritize and want truth. The great recalibration, I think, is giving us language to understand what we're actually trying to continuously hold on to and what we are willing to surrender to and let settle. And I want to address something directly. I know that a lot of media executives find that independent journalists and independent journalism is maybe a threat to the traditional way we've told stories, but I believe that that is a false dichotomy, and I really believe that, that collaboration is the way forward, because we need each other. So I'll wrap up with a couple points. For media institutions, this is just from my experience, obviously I'm speaking from a very personal place. Embrace transparency over objectivity. Encourage your reporters to share their process, to show their work, to be clear about their values. Instead of fearing them leaving, give them reasons to bring their community to you. Invest in the authentic voices who are already within your organization, and give them, you know, editorial independence, shared ownership of content that can transform potential competitors into allies. And then finally, collaborate. Collaborate with an independent storyteller who has access to a community that you're struggling to connect with. Give them fair compensation that recognizes and values their built-in audience and creative input on both sides. And then finally, for independent journalists and storytellers who are in this room, the first piece of advice or guidance that is absolutely critical is self-investigation. Self-investigation means investigating your own story, your own beliefs first, because we must understand how our biases and how our world perspectives have been shaped. Expand your definition of storytelling. You are a multifaceted human being. And iterate, iterate, iterate. Think about the people who have done this before you, the people who inspire the work that you do today, and make sure that you're building a collaborative team. And something that my friend and mentor Seth Godin says is focus on the smallest viable audience. What is the smallest audience that you need in order to do the work that you want to do with integrity and sustainability? And finally, embrace what I call revolutionary representation, which is the thesis of rep and the acknowledgement that the stories that we are telling are very much alive, that we are constantly evolving. And so if I talk to you today on stage, that maybe some of the things that I shared with you today, next week, I would think differently about them. Approach our storytelling in this way. Revolutionary representation.
Now, Noor, we are very over time.
I know, I know.
I know you've got one more slide. Let's bring up the blue slide, because this is the context. Right?
The end.
Sorry. Noor is a big round of applause.